Nipa gunle nam shin yende gunge genpa bo semje gunge nyen chikbo tamche genla gun chanze omen chege genpo dane dusum sangye gunge ngawony ransam chugo ngasuma denze ben sawe lame shabla so wande dambichu nyamsulimbi kulung sangbu ngijungi sambatang janjubki simdang timbe koni lungi chudi teobatang sambe nyamsulimbi shu
Please start by arousing the most excellent, pure motivation, which is twofold. That is the mind of renunciation and the mind of awakening, bodhicitta. And then please think that you're going to apply this Dharma of scriptures by means of receiving the teachings, reflecting on them, putting them into practice.
tani tamansu lamki rimbeke nangni shilam desum ke kola shubir kabre ta den nangni tani lam sini di shubir kabre ta lam di tani golsa ni yores karires na tani thotoda kurdip ni budi lam ge golsa cho ni din sungbare ta den nangni tani nganzu thotok se di khandesh imba mesini ni de thar malung ye di ani lam ki kapsula ge chimbo chikcha de yoba indi de kola sugare.
In terms of the topic of our teachings, we're talking about the path of Mahamudra, and there specifically we're discussing the ground, path, and fruition. There, among those 3 points, we are still presently focusing on the path itself. And in the context of talking about the path, we're actually discussing the 2 potential ways we can go astray, the 2 mistakes we might commit and fall prey to. Those are namely the superimpositions that we impute or denigrations, right? That also we impute. Among those, we are focusing on this so-called superimpositions or kind of exaggerations that our mind engage in. And it is actually extremely important to identify those patterns of our mind when we superimpose through identity to things which don't have it, and so that we can try our best to avoid it, right? And because it's such an important topic, we're still continuing to talk about it.
Ta daksin di tani dak yo mare ine yang dakdu zimba di yore la shuk chimba yore tani sangye ki ta sung ki nani tani penna anzu shirab ki parul du chimba ta namkyu ngaran su shirab nyingbu tinsu chasang ki tsa chimbo chi tsiki yore yinbi gyumsen de karare sana tani deki tonda nyingbu di dhammi se di tingi yoba tang 딘데긴 다미 세디 디니 다징기 뇌닌 임바당 나와산지 백업슬라 람스니 디니 주구죽사디안다 조디 다미 또비 셔럽세들라 주기 주용 거래 딘데다디 타이웨기 텐라 파베당 아주 냠린 나니 냠린기 닝부다워지 차되게 요래
So talking then about superimpositions, doing our best to avoid that. Here we are talking about the lack of a truly existing self. And even though there is no self, nevertheless, we strongly cling to a self. Our grasping is quite deeply embedded, right, in our minds. And that is why we can say that the essence of the practice, kind of essential teachings of the Buddha, we kind of presented in the Prajna Paramitas, for example, sutras. The essence of practice is exactly the one that shows the lack of truly existing self, right? The teachings that point out that lack of truly existent self, that reveals selflessness to us, are kind of this essence of the path of the Buddha Dharma, and specifically the wisdom that realizes selflessness. We can say this is also an essential, kind of vital part of the Buddhist path. And it is likewise a vital, crucial part of the Buddhist view.
다디 인데 다메디 우메게 값솔라 리발라 소베거니 텐라 파피당 데니 당 아주 냠린 제베 값소 캡도니 로종니 야라 냠린 탐제디 다메당 데르바 있나 데니 최디 오니 최양다 버스 차겨래 가장이 슈바나시 최 스스기 냠린 제샤바디 다메기 님볼레 도바 있나 아니 최 람도 도와 세 쳇다고 딘들 샤겨래 아주 파징기 쳇샤베 값솔라 양드니 두스야도 와 디인데 다디 캡트니 셈게니 야지니드니 다메디 삼노땅 그거라 곰 그거라 곰토바이나 소소 제샤비기 냠린텔라야 시라기 디부다 이펙트 민다와지 뭐니 뭐서도 용그래 디마토 아니 나란조 따출라 최두바다오지 임발라 덩을라디니 지 갭니 스스 제샤바디 다진디 냠볼라 만도와제니 다진 공불도 되라 지 칼라소다와지 차송바이나 그나가서 가서 인지kel라야나지 indirectly feeding one's own ego 되네 마음 착스그러와 하나서 람드베 값을 아니 최 두긴라 나결체로 강해체로 셈마디마디를 돼 차상대 김신딜라 두고 그래 망고지 아주 한마고네 unknowingly 들이 차두고 그래 봐
That is why in the whole of the Buddha Dharma, we can say the main focus is on resolving the selflessness. If you look at the middle way philosophy, that's exactly the aim of the Madhyamika tradition, is to resolve the lack of truly existing self by means of reasonings, logical argumentations. But likewise, in our own practice, right, anything we do, starting from going for refuge and then training our mind with Lojong and so on and so forth, Batichit and other parts of our daily practice, they all are likewise deeply connected to this view of selflessness. I mean, to say that they're deeply connected, actually they supposed to be connected, linked to selflessness, to that view of a lack of truly existing self. And when they are, when anything we do, when we recite the refuge prayer, bodhicitta, and so on, when it's actually really connected, has something to do with that understanding of truly existing self, that understanding of a lack, of a self, then whatever we do is indeed the sacred Dharma. It becomes the Dharma, right? Because the whole aim, purpose of the practice is to remedy this clinging to the self. If it does that, that's the real Dharma, right? I have mentioned that already in the previous teachings. Actually, that's also how we can measure the progress in our practice of 6 paramitas, right? Whether or not our practice is genuine practice of paramitas, all depends whether what we do is connected, linked to selflessness, right? If it does, then that's the Dharma. If it's not, then it might appear like it's a Dharma, right? But in reality, it won't have the same deep effect. It won't really yield the same result, because it might be so-called kind of a Dharma on the surface, but indirectly, it's going to keep feeding our ego, right? And then the more we do practice, and if it has nothing to do with selflessness, then actually what happens is almost the opposite effect happens. We become more proud, we have more disturbing emotions, we are unhappy for some reason, right? It happens unknowingly. It's not like we're really aware of that, but, right? We don't recognize it, but that's what happens when whatever we do, whatever practice we engage in, is not kind of imbued with the view of selflessness.
Di indu nganzu da shenpa shidal ki tamga danzu nangla yang dini tse dila shina cheba min sani sungsha bati ya tusa kabal tukre sana da jizin sayadar tukare diga na shinga dini dadun la shina jangsin min sayadwa diyang kabal tukre sana dini da jizin sayadar tukudwa di indu ngaranzu cheba yagoji chago dina ya tuksa di da jizin shu chechungla yume la tukdugo yore 장주 셈랑규 레게다 메게세에 대한 투사디 다 제전의 도용도와 내가 타고디.
If we look, for example, at the very famous teachings known as parting from 4 attachments, right? The first line there reads, if you are attached to this life, you are not a Dharma practitioner. This points out to what? It points out exactly to the self-cherishing attitude, being attached to this life. It's right, feeding the self-cherishing attitude. Second line there reads, if you are attached to your own well-being, you don't have bodhicitta. Again, very much has to do with the self-cherishing attitude. Right, so we can see that whether or not we are real Dharma practitioners has to do with how strong or how feeble our self-cherishing attitude is. Likewise, we can measure our bodhicitta, our mind of awakening, again by looking at how strong is our self-cherishing ego clinging is. So everything comes down to this self-cherishing attitude and the self.
당아주 다음에 디 조금 제당 것 쉬고요래. 다델라 가상 림바카시 예비나니 rinpa dangpo di ta chidang ta chezin se di nyamong dang dunghe gi gyu yinpa di nguzin je di di kwa shu simbari mangpo shirirwa. Ta di je tsawe che la dini nipa di nga zu rinpa nipa di ta kari che gu go resa na dakzin di pangwa la dangpo dakzin di chuba yinpa ngo she gu go re. Di ngo she bar che pala dini lo sur nebe ko ni ngoni ngarang ki zimba nanshin ki samba nanshin ki da tende chik duga midu sini ta lo ki zindang tardu yo ki tengdu du midu sini tachi tanya rwa. Ta di tini nga zo rinpa nyebari di shubi kapre.
In the previous Dharma sessions, in the previous few Dharma sessions, we have been looking at what is called analytical meditation on selflessness. And there are a few different stages, right, that we have to go through. The first stage is basically just to identify the kind of main culprit or main cause of our afflictive, disturbing emotions, of our neurosis, of our suffering, as self-cherishing attitude, right? Identifying that ego clinging, that self-cherishing as the main reason for why we suffer, why our minds are disturbed. And I think I have explained that in a great detail, right? So then we moved on to the second stage of analytical meditation, where what is important is to, in order then to abandon the self-clinging, right? This kind of clinging to self or the self-cherishing attitude, we need to understand that it's nothing but a projection, like confusion of our minds. In order to do so, we need to engage in our own investigation in a very open-minded, unbiased manner, like really genuinely asking and checking, is there really this so-called self, just like I usually think and believe that it is, right? I take it for granted, but is it really so, right? In a very open-minded and of genuine, unbiased manner, we need to analyze and investigate by asking these questions. And this is what we are discussing, this second stage of analytical meditation on selflessness.
Ta chidang dame di keche she yung du chik di intellectual ngoy ni keche she ni samlo mangpo tangyo, rikpa mangpo tangyo chik dang. Yang so chik nyongwa la jar ni samlo tangtang chik nyi yoro wa. Di niga dreba de yore, rikpa pa su kope yore. Ina yang ta tanda nga zu chekom chebe ka su la di chik intellectual ke ta chik tak se di tsenyi ta mangpo chik tindirang shira samlo ta rungpo tangyo yo ma re. Ta kangda so ki chik nyongwa la jar ni. Ta nga se chik duwa mindu laya mindu wa. Nga mindu lamna nga zu zunshe bata so la zunshe she sa marwa. Mi shenpa chiki keche diba ina zun lamna peche tiksara ta ngarang la ta nga mindu saya mindu yo dirwa. Ta di yo na ni ngarang nga sidi namgyu ngarang la kande chi yin tingi do usen ta di keche dundu la sambo tango go. Di ya chekom che sudi shivu chikbe chik rikpa shivu tango ya dinde kanya yo ma re. Di kechung bare. Di mato ya nga zu di intellectual ki trap nang la tsuru kudwa.
Generally speaking, when we talk about selflessness and resolving that, right, meditating on selflessness, there are these two approaches. The one is what Khenpo himself, right, said in English, it's the very much intellectual approach to selflessness, and another one is more emotional one. Of course, they are connected, right? When we use reasonings and logical argumentations on an intellectual level, it does affect us emotionally and vice versa. But nevertheless, here, in the context of how I'm explaining the analytical meditation, if we will go into the direction of just purely looking at definitions of the self, right? The divisions, the different this and that, it's going to feel very remote, something that has nothing to do with our real life. And that's not what we need here. All right? We really need to go through analytical meditation, connecting it to how we really feel, like right now, how we perceive ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, not just some intellectual, right, elaborations on how self is or not, right? Because if we ask ourselves, but how is there real self? Like, is there I, right? We will have to say that, yeah, there is this I, this me who's asking this question. It's here, right? Because we can't really lie to ourselves. If someone else asks us, is there a self? We can give all this, blah, blah, there's no self and this and that. We can easily sort of, so kind of fake it, right, for others, but we can't fake it with ourselves. And we do feel there is this kind of presence of an I, and it's all right. We start exactly there with that feeling of perceiving me, I, and how do we see it? How do we describe it? What features we attribute to it? That's where we start, right? It's really, really important. So it's not really about this kind of a very flowery and lengthy and of lavish reasonings. Because if we go into only that direction, there is a danger we will fall into what Khenpo again said in English, an intellectual trap. And we don't want that.
Tini da tinte chini susu nyongwa tan charni tayong tu nge khasan shui tsoye de kechumbare, nye de kechumbare. Manzu da nga se di kandere dus tse yungo rawa. Tsolgyo rawa, to search. Tsole de kechumbare 가르에서는 다 가르진데 투바 임바 것이 고라. 네 인지 민지 nye 고고요 말아. 마녀는 아니 디서포인트 차고 말해. 직 니바디 간주 인지 민지 드링 가리 nie바디 드링 데레 삼바디 사니디 연구고요 말해. 디코 파지 림바신도야 gyudo 그래도 gyune 개봐요 말해. 야가리 gyu도네. 디인디다 수수기도 스니 제바지 아니 제바지니 가레 코난지 샤르기 두나야더니 데시숭니 드니 파 미투니 투니 도샤과이나 아니지 인지 민지 안주기 지 잘라츠니 지 녜바나신지는 다 디레샤스니 디라지 인고고 말해 디딜라더니 아주 지다 다음에 거미 녜네 민도스네 다 육샤 삼바라거든요 심주 차예요 말해
Dagme цели негимендус, care dagni maniana, right? Okay, that's one. Go on the camp of Jesus. I think there's a little bit of gap. The audio for me, sorry. So when it comes to the emotional investigation, whether or not it's this so-called self, right, on the feeling basis, on the level of feelings, right, or kind of our emotional research, as I have already mentioned, looking for the self, researching it is really important. Not if we don't find it, that's all right. We don't need to be disappointed. If we find it today, whatever we discovered by that research, again, don't expect it to, to remain, that kind of discovery to remain the same tomorrow. If you look again for it, what you discovered yesterday might not be there anymore. Perhaps it will already change, and that's okay. It's even better this way, right? So it's really important to understand that can't be disappointed if we like look and then we don't find, and then we want to stop and quit. No, that's all right. Basically, we start with what I just explained, with this feeling, how the self presents itself to us, right? How do we feel it when it arises? And then we go with that, right? And we look and research and see, do we really find it there or not?
다 된데 스니드니 검긴 침바이나 갈라 강삼직니드니 디 레도 디 마레뚝 세니 니주 메네야 similar ranking chi deng lepure slavare je mi she pas deng lechach
Khenpo just selpo sögi chedo natso gomgin di dag di pagiona mena di kapsu natso semgi rangshin di dachik digi korla dengchik yonger tijereva.
예 나가서 다음에 검용으로와 검용 백값을라 다디 텐데지 레샤 삼베기 지금 많이 봐이네야 아니 지금 디 레도 디 마레도 세베게 지 가르쳐 거르다 니가라지 태준 매베게 니셰 숙체로 저를 도그래 송거래
Nishedi karegi korla dije
니셰디 켄자오 저래 송거래 디 레 세베게 니셰야 마레라 디 마레 세베게 니셰야 마레스라 버래 이네양 니셰지 용거래스라 버래
I'll try my best. Khenpo can correct me if I'm wrong. While meditating on, while engaging in this analytical meditation, right, researching, looking for the so-called self, right, is it this way? Even if we might not find it, right, there is some type of confidence, certainty that arises in our minds, kind of in the depths, of our minds. There's confidence, that certainty that has no doubt, and it's not even confidence that we can describe with words, right? It's like a profound ease and relaxation in our minds that happen. And I tried to clarify with Khenpo, what kind of confidence is it? And he said, well, it's a funny one because we can't really put it into words. It's almost like it's, if we ask, well, is the self like this? We can't say it is. But if we say, well, is it means it's not like this? We also can't. It's like certainty in this kind of strange way. Khenpo, was it something what you said?
아토르디나 다티 딘데지 레둑 삼베기 녜셰야 마임바제 딘데지 마레둑 삼베 녜셰야 마임바제 아니 간데이나 삼베 태즈메 메바제 딘데기 녜셰지 끼기요레 송바레
So it is said that this confidence, that certainty is interesting one. It's like, if it's asked, is it confidence that the self is like this? No, it's not. Is it the confidence that the self is not like this? No, it's not. But then is there still doubts? How is the self? No, there are no doubts. So you see, it's really inexpressible type of confidence that arises in our minds.
Dina yimba membeki donla tesum chasang chösabeki nishi kigres labare.
In short, it's type of certainty that really cuts through all our mental speculations about is the self like this or it is not like this, right? It is existent, it is non-existent. All these speculations are gone, cut through.
Alaso da tende indu nganzu khasang da rimba nipa dirwa da ngazang ki da do zimba di kande chela nga segi do sini di cheba chebe kawre da di dine ngaranzu namgyu chi samlo yakbo tangbayina ko chi senyi sina minu khorangi keju shi dawo chi dine nganzu zingires di shu barwa.
I also explained or mentioned in relation to the second stage of analytical meditation on selflessness is that, there are 4 special features or kind of, characteristics, marks of this kind of self or how we grasp to self, right? How do we see the self, right? If we think about it, we can attribute these 4 special features to it.
Da di nani khasang nganzu keju da chi ko keju shuk chishu dawo da ngunsal dobo da ani da keju nganzu ina chi the most sensitive keju dawo di kar resna tine chebar chimba se di shu ba da kangdar ge chimba jire cha chimba ji the most dear to oneself. Ani ta de imba songsa ta yakshu di nga sa kugudu, toshu la nga lep kugudu, cheshu di nga yin kugudu sambe de nga ran chasang di yungudu wa. Ta di chasang la rangshin ye yode bare.
Among these 4 characteristics or features of this kind of self, so-called self, the one is specifically most, we can say, specifically prevalent in all of us, just naturally so, right? Khenpo said it's the most sensitive top, among all the other features. The most sensitive kind of quality of the self is that with it's the kind of quality or feature that this me is the most important. I am the most important. The self is the most dear and most precious thing that exists, right? The most dear to myself is me. And therefore, the highest position should be mine. The greatest things should be mine. The best of all things, best food, etc., should belong to me, right? And we all have that kind of just kind of a default setting, kind of by nature, we have this perception that the self is extremely important. This me is really precious.
Di ndu ni khasang shu, dende imba songsa di sa nga zu zambuling na la dini chong de ya maan chewa di chong di ngobu chong le kyang maan chewa di karisa kora nga su ina chi. Psychological chong di shuk che re do wa. Pena mangbo jik da chong mangbo jik kar re yorisana da just to make you feel you're important. Tinsu ngobo mara do wa. Ngobo se kora karisa kora nga su ina chi. Material mara do wa. Psychological commodity do cha de.
And that's why, as I have mentioned, these days in the world, when it comes to business selling stuff, to consumerism, what sells the best is not even material stuff, but this kind of what Khenpo calls psychological commodity, where we are made to feel like we are great, right? That's what's being sold to us, like with something that just makes us feel really wonderful about ourselves. And that's not material stuff necessarily.
Peshe nganzu ge di tsinyi dangbo chero tsinyi dangbo de la nganzu chidang da na nipsho gyagaw la ina chebar zimba se di narcissism se di dang jis daw daw re dwa ani je nganzu da karso korbe je psychology ki sheba ina je narcissistic personality disorder se di yungu dwa this is daw daw dach mendo ding du
I think if we look at this self-cherishing attitude a little bit through the lens of Western also psychology, and I think it has something to do with narcissism, kind of with narcissistic personality disorder. At least I think so.
chidang nganzu su la tsewa je di yakura wa di dugu mare ine yang tini ta jezin se di kyangwa mare rangshin simjen tamche dewa dewa dan dunga mi dewa da jikba inbe chani rangla tsewa jeba di kyun yo mare de ine yang nga ge chi sho yin ani nga to sho shile bugudu sambe samba di da jezin re dawa di ni iwa che gu re su la tsewa jeba dan ani da jezin se keba yo re da jezin se di nyamdo nga gya dan chado dan mangbo ji le bi do ba.
And here it's important to differentiate between the self-cherishing attitude and just having love and for oneself, right? There's nothing wrong with loving, appreciating, being kind to oneself. Where self-cherishing attitude is not like that, because if we just love and cherish, appreciate ourselves in the way that we also think, well, I'm one of sentient beings and all of us equally want happiness and want to avoid suffering, I deserve that, like all beings, that's all right. But here we're talking about something else. The self-cherishing attitude is kind of this narcissism, right? It's where we think, well, all beings want it, but I deserve it the most, right? I am the most important among all other beings. So right there, on top of having that kind of attitude, either way, we have pride, we have jealousy, competitiveness, this whole spectrum of those kind of disturbing states of mind. So it's important, therefore, to differentiate just pure love, appreciation for oneself, and this kind of distorted, self-cherishing, narcissistic attitude.
그래서 다더니 다 가상 다 지진데 그 지단계 생이라고 그러더와 다된 나는데니 지 남규 나란 소라지니 딘데긴 다 지진데 슉 첨부 용해 빌딩 블록스라고 딘데기더니 생이스나 민도 거란지 진단데 수미래 송거래.
So this is the general sort of characteristic of the this kind of self-clinging, right? That we have this self-cherishing attitude. But then that's kind of the main sort of prevalent feature, as I said. But then there are also three separate building blocks, so to say, that strengthen this self-cherishing attitude, that contribute to contribute to to proliferation of self-cherishing attitude. So what are those three then?
다 데디드니 당보디 남규 ngase디 찌긴 삼바직 용거 전당디 두스니 신겨와 되니 니바디 다 ngase디 코지 딱바 가상긴가당 데링긴가당 딘술라더니 이제 강다 그 규와티아바지 아주 삼당 두고요 말에 되니 짐바책 되더니 nga세디 이제 랑완진지 근데 임베기 되니 짐바지 심바지열에 승발.
So those three attributes to the self that kind of build and stronger self-cherishing I is that, first of all, is the perception, kind of really perception of this I being singular, something that it's singular by nature. The second attributing feature is that this I is permanent, that there is no change between the I of yesterday and this I of today, right? It just remains the same throughout the time. That's the second feature that we impute on the self, on the I. And third one is that we perceive the I to be autonomous, to be independent.
다디 그 돈다디 가르레스나 ngaransu ngoyogi nisul라 직레베스나 nga세디 직차게요 말에 이내야 남기 가뒤이내야 nga사게요 nga 퉁게요 디니 nga 도게요 로와 내가 난신기다 직소솔라 가르스는 땅바이네 nga 망보 초대바지 인생은 아주 남주산이 삼도 고금이도 와 nga세디 초바이 맞지 간주 남주 독수로를 시작이 말해 nga세디 코지 다 세부시라요 말데 강다 찌긴 삼바지 숙충부지요래.
And the meaning of those three features is as following. The first one, right, the singularity of an I. If we think about, well, how is this I? Right? In reality, I is not singular. If we think about how things truly are from that perspective. But in terms of how we see it, right, not from how it really is, but how we see it, we think, well, I'm eating, or I had a drink, I am walking, and in our minds, this I is singular. We don't think there's this multiple I, or we don't think that I is made of multiple elements. That's the point. We don't think that I is just like kind of like a agglomeration, grouping together of many various elements and conditions, etc. It's not very clear because we don't think about it in a very clear way, but somewhere it is this hazy notion that is this me and it's one, right? It's singular.
Pena nga tang azu dawa chashawan losum shibjule sare. Tene losum shibjula tang azu ji gyurim dawa misegi gyurim la samatang baine ya. ngoma pugu chungchung chade be kabre. Diga na shin dini ta shunu chabare. Da kalakan samje gebu chayong gore. Diga na shin ngoma nga migyaji chade gore. dawa swebe ngola. Dijala dawa chabare. Dijala lobdu chabare. Da kandaji nga gi misegi gyurim chasang de nyamde shane tebai na mangbu shiwji nga mangbu shiwji yordela. Ta ine yang namgyu nga ta ngama ngarang jindang de kande jingresena chungchung kapsugi nga di ngarang in samba mato nga mangbo jigi gyurimni yong shaba in samba dene nga ju samba chu yongmedo wa yonggo mare. Dene imba songza dene nga la ji ngoma ki yagochi laba ine dandayan to shake de bachi chakwa ke de bachi ani lo dawang on la michi ki tsingemba laba ine de ngala lapsong sambe ki dadayang ala shedang ke de bachi yonggo yoro ba chadang shu chombo chi ke yore ngone jene deba de deba chasang chinsa bara ba yo mare rede ine yanda nga sedi chikin sambaji mado duma dini duishakwe ki phungbuji in sambe ki samrodi nganzu mashe yongdu mato yondu 아니 델라테니 데발라테니 차당 망보치기 마옹발테니 차당 망보치기 연구를 다 페나 ngama kogi ngala singem pa tende lapsons dandaya nga lunglang tigero ba kare channel tena ngala lapsong tingero ba 내가 난 신기다 마음 발라더니 거기 ngala 팬도 그래 마음 밖에 ngala 팬도 그래 삼백이더니 지 레와 망고 지겨로 봐 소소로 봐이나 다 dinsu shasan kawan yungu yoresena ngone jine debe ngata maungbe ngata dada ngati chik marwa ngoy nisula ina ngai da de chasan de ruru da chik la tan jin yongdu de cham ge chadang de ni deba la samtan chadang maungba samtan chadang the chadang sena min dong az inji ke la hope in fear mangbo chi le byong do ba
If I think about myself, I take myself, for example, kind of being in my middle age, sort of between 30 and 40, I went through many different stages already in my life. I was a child, a kid, adolescent, adult, right? I was a layperson at first, and I became ordained monk. Then I was a student, a teacher. So kind of this me, took many different forms throughout various stages of my life. But I somehow think it's the same me, right? The singularity is basically imputation of the sameness throughout all those different stages of life, right? I think, well, the little me, the kid now, it's the same, right? I don't think, and I think we don't think that this I is actually just a collection of many various elements that we call aggregates, right? They change over time. We think there's this self that's kind of singular. It's the same in the past, same in the future. There's this singularity to it. It's not a collection of many moments in life, but rather it's like one. And that's why we also feel a lot of attachment and anger, hope and fear. Well, for example, right? If someone told us in the past something really nice and we kind of got attached to that praise, we also have hope that in the future this person is going to praise me, right? It's like, well, because we don't understand that those good words to me, kind of told me in the past were had something to do with me in the past, and that is gone. It's gone. There's no more. Or same with with criticism, right? I got angry when someone criticized me, and now I'm afraid it's going to repeat itself because we think there's this just singular I, same in the past, same in the future, and so we therefore feel a lot of hope and fear, right? When it comes to that, in reality, how things really are. Of course, it's not. It's not the same, right? As I said, it's a collection of many various those moments of throughout different stages of life, kind of a not singularity, but rather it's multiplicity of different elements and factors.
되니 다 찍디 딱벌 좀 봐서 좋아 다 디디디니 페나 당에 나생 주구주구 사대 내기다 남주 지 수부당 셈당에 주구주구여와 디니보들라 다디 ngarangi kandi zingirese nge ngama pugu kapsu ki suku digarang in samsam do chere diga na shingi nge samba de yantini ngoma ke samba kare yimba digarang in samba do mato di khagaji in samba do da keji ngama jigni keji chima de sardo ke shaba jire sambe nga samta samba nga zo kogu marwa ta di indi kapsula pena nga subula samtang bai ne chidang ni duje ki chue thamje kejik tangbo ke ba ni kejik ni bala mine ba ka to go ba ti nge subu dia pet kona chasang jep sar ba kejik la samtang bai na dega na shin ki nge ki semba de antini pugu kapsu samba de tang tanda kapsu semba ni mangbo shibuji jetsa ba da gyunda chik ba re de korangi ngoda ta inayang namba di dawara ba pet nge nga chungchung kapsu ni bu imba tanda bu imba ta shira ki gyuwa di shibuji chombo tegi meba songsa ani nga zu gyun la chik du tulni pena nga dawaji kejik la pet kha nyema chik mi cha nyema chik ki cha nyema chik piu dawa cha dugo ni yang tozu topa sagirwa ta kare na samsan dawa shungro ba di yungu yo mara ta kanta ka gyundi mi imba ta diga na shin bu imba ta di gyuwa di ko pe dawu chi namba di gyundi chikpa chi cha digi yo ba indi ani nga ngoma chungchung kapsu nga digarang in sambaji mato ngoma chungchung kapsu nga chasang de ga sabare samba dawu tan di ani nga zu suku tan sem ni kala du singi yo mara di redi ine ya ngoye nisu la kare resina nga ranzu ngoma ki nga sekin zugu sa di ga ni dusu yunungbo re tsare la lui dang sem ni ka tanda chasang di masebe da tanjing penna keranzu ki tangi zinda tsubi ki nga di na tanda nga di jikba re dingi yoro ba ine ya nga zu keji ki ngone samotang ba ina jikba chage yo mare tangi ki nga di ga ni dusu yunungbo chin sabare tanda nga di sabare ine ya nge ki namba di da gyun di jikba yinba songsa ani jikba dawo chi 통고 yore
If someone asks, so where is this I? What is this self? We point to our body, right, to our mind, kind of attributing the self to it. And we think that the body and the mind that I have right now in this moment are exactly the same body and mind that I used to have before, right? Like when I was a child, adolescent, and so on, right? We think that it's not really different. It's like because me remain this kind of singular entity, right? So it's always me. And right throughout all my life, it has this kind of essence and it remains same. Uh-huh. Oh, sorry. So, in then Khenpo kiti gyudi natsu chik natsu gyundi or this dag di chikpula natsu gotom geres chikpula yansik sumpare.
nga zu di kare cheni tul dugo yore sena gyun di dawa yungo yore dawa
Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. Sorry, my mistake as translator. We're now talking about the second feature of permanence, because they're connected also. If someone asks us, where is the self? We point to our body and mind and we say they remain the same, right? We don't identify that the previous moment of body and mind has ceased and the new moment has arisen and this is new me in this moment. This is completely new I, right? We don't think like that. Actually, from the first moment to the second, like if we just take the continuum of moments, moment by moment by moment, right? First moment ceases, the next arises, and then we can't find this permanent self in those two moments, because everything already totally changed from the first to the second moment. Everything has been renewed, the mind, the body, right? Of course, same when I was a child, compare, from taking the body and mind of me as a child, those two have completely changed. But what remained the same is the continuum. And the thing is that the moments in that continuum, in terms of how it appears, how I appear, right? The moments in the continuum resemble each other. They resemble each other. There is the likeness to them, right? The moment of me in the past, the moment of me in this, the subsequent following moment, they are alike. And that's why we confuse that continuum to be that kind of singular permanent self. Of course, if in the previous moment I was a human, in the next I become a monkey, the next one I change into a dog, there we would pause and think, well, then who am I? But because I remain human from the previous moment to this moment, and I remain a male, right? In the previous moment and then subsequent moment, I'm a male. There is the likeness, resemblance, right? Those moments resemble each other. I remain human, I remain male. So because they're so similar to each other, those moments, we impute that notion of a self. And we don't really perceive the subtlety of those like moments and change that happens from moment to moment, that something ceases and then arising newly in the next moment. Especially here we're talking about not something but our mind and body. They cease and then they arise again. Like you probably think from the moment, from the time the class started, until now, it's the same Khenpo sitting right there in front of you on the screen, right? It's me, it's the same. But in reality, so many moments have already passed from the beginning of the class till now, and I have changed. This is new me. Moment by moment, it's new me, but we don't see it. And we don't see it because those moments, the appearances, like at least how they present themselves in terms of those kind of appearing aspects, they're very similar to one another. And that's why we impute that notion of permanence on the basis of that continuum.
Tadi lela gore penang anzu video daw taba ine ya koji video di mitini yongar che bala part di daw yoku gudwa pena frame chasan daw yoku gudwa karam frame sunju sanyi di chasan chik migi frame look chik teni migi par mikhashi langbo che par daw damre look shawa ine di continue di yong mare migi di leg mare adi nashin chi chadi gore.
And it's very easy really to understand what I'm trying to say. Just think about the video, right? It's what happens in the video. If we have those 32 frames, right, in a second, then they have to resemble each other in terms of the kind of frame, what is showing for us to see it as a continually evolving, right, picture. If in 32 frames, one there's a human image, the next is elephant, the next is cat, what we will see, it will not make any sense. It won't be registered for us, right? There's some kind of image that's in the video. So it's exactly the same here.
Tadini sumba di peke chumbare rawanchen se di tadi karisegi versena dortina go devojine keje sheba na ngarang ki gare demba na shinju gogudu cha gogres di mena tini digmare sambe taje joshare dila rawanchen sena tini rawanchen slavra sumbadi sedida 당아서 인지를 해서 everything has to be the way I want.
The third feature that we ascribe to an I, it's this kind of autonomy. Well, maybe it's not, that's what I'm thinking now based on Khenpo's definition. I am in control, everything. Maybe it's not autonomy, but right? No? So, but independent, autonomous are same, but here in the, okay, let's see, based on the following definitions, we might retranslate English. For now, Ramon Chen generally we say is autonomous, independent self, and it's really an important one, right? Because to put it simply, basically we think that everything has to happen according to my wishes, how I want it.
다디 지당 할래 가요 말데 할래버지 가래 요랬으나 아주 셈게 된데스니 덴바 나신지네 아주 들ong데 용거리에서 레와인지겨 디페 할래보다 그래.
You know, it's not surprising that we wish for that, like kind of like that we all have that in our minds, like, oh, I want everything, to happen like exactly like I want. But what is really amazing that we still, this time age, we still hope that it's actually going to happen that way. Everything gonna fall in right place exactly according to my wishes. We still entertain that expectation in our lives.
다디 가래 순거 요랬으나 아주 가래 딩거 요랬으나 가래 제바디 나랑기 다가 인지시 가래 베지 단계 요나 하고 마스 다가 이제 가래 제바디 나랑기 the independent ya mendo 지 삼신도 나랑기 라왕기 지기요 지 구구도 지기 인삼베 된데 그 좋아지요. 다디 아주 배 출발하는 출발 첨부제 가르에서는 나랑도 땡들어와. 땡들 임바 마세 시다게 땡들기 나나 되고 그래. 그봐. 배 충주니 차상 땡들 차 되게 그래. 쉐담제 다 최탐지 덴데기 덴들지 임베 나는 빼는 안한 저기 작업 강지 통고되네 디 치다 똥다 망보단 대화차 되게 여백이 낭라 아니 나랑 그 삼반하신 제국의 연결해 삼바디 빼다 노르는 노르 첨부지래 출발하는 출발 첨부지래.
Now I see how it fits with the independence. So basically what happens here is that we all think that everything has to happen right according to my needs, my wishes, because I have that kind of almost like control of free will for everything to happen the way I want. We don't really take into consideration that everything that happens to me has to do with so many other factors and other beings, because we are not independent. We are not autonomous entities. We are extremely interdependent, all of us, right? We depend on so many factors. So for things to happen my way, I think like, oh, I want a cup of tea, so I'm gonna make it like I want and I'm gonna have it. Like almost we isolate that event from so many other factors. We think it's just can exist in and of itself independently. And so that's why we're gonna get things like we want. We completely forget that just for that cup of tea to really happen, there's so many other moments and beings and people and events that have to take place, right? So we are not independent. Things are not going to happen like according to my wish, because we all depend on on other beings from a really young age. I mean, from beginning, from youngest of our age, this is the case.
난 안수 디 가서 그래. 시스템 안수 가르세나다 땡들 기 시스템 기 차시 준용지 차 되게 봐. 마도 가야 말해.
We are each and and every one of us is just a small bit in this huge system of interdependence, right? We're just one small element in this kind of like a matrix of interdependence.
다디 깨져 곧 되어지나 만족이 가리 딩기리스나 I make choices. 소시 리브 봐. 딩원이 말에 만족이 가디노의 choice 다 제토고 말에 가르에서 만족 땡들어 봐. 두제로 봐. 또 두마제라고 짐바에는 따드네 랍나티스 렘보라고 셔로 봐. 만족 두제래. 두제 있나 땡들 임바 캡고 그래. 땡들 있나 아니 네 choice 제세야 돼 용하고 싫어요.
So we do think that we make choices, like it's my choice and that's why I'm doing it, but in reality it's always that we depend on so many factors because we are conditioned, compounded beings, right? And everything that's conditioned is interdependent. Right? It will be very fitting to say that we are unconditioned, like we're not really conditioned by anything, right? And so actually we do have this kind of control and everything is just my personal choice, my free will, but in reality it's not the case, isn't it?
네 인도다 도르디나 걔랑 땡들랑 올림 맞아 봐제니 땡들라파 아직 땡들냠들라파 먹을 제바이나 가뒤네 양 아주 톱게 말해 걔랑 땡들랑 올린 제나 디 시라게 야가지요래.
In short, it will make our lives much easier if we just accept that simple truth of interdependence rather than rebelling against it, rather than resisting it.
당에 인디펜던스에 찍디티스 고아더지 디네 거니 슈게 시디사마 로바 제 셴라 떼메고 봐 라왕랑 기지 예 삼바텔라 세거래.
So therefore I'm explaining this autonomy, independence, right? Independence, this third feature is this kind of a misconception that we don't need to depend, we don't depend on anything or anyone. It all happens kind of according to just our own sort of control and free will.
다디 간데레스나 페나 페슨라고 슈바이네야 안수 네 choice니 제바인 딩게 요르데 삼로 야보다는 디 셴지기 gyugin tendir ge wan cha sha para ma do ngarangi tam sha pa mare pena namju nga zu garreta nga sani de ni sagi yes ngarangi thuni de ni thungu ye de ni ding yo wa samlo yabotana di nga gi rawang je sha pa mare garresna nga saye di ni togo gi wang ge re do wa togo to ba songza ne rawang me bi thoni khala sa go chung re 카콤바 송자 라와 메베 토니 추통 거 중으로 와 마토지기 도고 똑발라 마트 바르 카콤발라 마트 바르 나랑기 되니 사샤보다 통샤바지 레베선 디자니 차게요 말해 다케지 충중지 계지 셰바이나다 데레도 와다 사예당 통에 된줄라 라와 메나다 셴바 된줄라 라와 메바티 라메고 바라 와 딘데 임바디 떼고고요 바디.
So in reality, it's not really up to me. Kind of, it's not up to my control, my choices. It's almost like it's the choice of causes and conditions that come together, right, in this interwoven matrix of interdependence. It's not up to me. We think it is like, oh, I'm going to eat this and that, or I'm going to drink this, that. That's like my choice. It's in my control. But in reality, is it so? Are we doing it really independently? In reality, we're doing it because stomach gets hungry. It demands food, so we have to provide it to the stomach, right? We get thirsty, our bodies get dehydrated, so we need to provide that water, right? It's not like done out of just like my personal choice. Well, I want, I do, I don't want, I don't do. Not really. It's like we are also very much under control in this case of just of our system, of our physiology. And this is just a very, very small example, right? Just about like food and water that we all need, and it's not really up to us, so to say. It's but if it's just about food and drinks that we don't really have a say, that we, well, in that department we absolutely have to do it if we want to remain alive, then what is there to say about other things? Of course they all likewise also kind of not within my own control or my own personal choice.
다 gisi rawa segindi yoba ina rawa imba ina teni pena togo tobe kapsula yang tanga khala sagi me sene detumna tingone rawa rawa ka kombe kapsula yang teni tanga chutungi me sene kran chi disturb macha wa chini ngama na shin chi detubgo na tingone rawa to bareta.
If it were really up to me, kind of if it were, according to my control, then once we get really, really hungry, don't eat, right? Don't eat continuously, like now, later and later and later. We really, really, could you do that? That maybe then we can say, okay, that's in your control. Or when you get thirsty, try not to then quench your thirst. Then we can say, well, that's maybe your decision. Really, that's your choice. But we are not like that, right? We are subject to those needs.
Di indu ngazu taji yapu tangna namju ngarangi choice damgi yo samba mangbo ji tingi yo re. Ine ya samdo yapu tangna di tamje shenwaan ma to rangwaan ji chagi yo ma re. Gyudan ken shen ji ki je shabi tibu kyanyan ji chagi yo pa indu. Ta di nyi kaptuk dugu yo marwa. Do mayong di kapsu tini ngazu nadu me shindu nawa. Dodo me shindu doga wa tu ondo tini ngazu semba di tu dugu yo re. Karresina ta nga ngazu tamje rangwaan ko ni cha gugu yo samba dawachi. Ane lakwa do ta tingsan ji ngazu lega mangpo ji ko button push ji ni je gugu yo pa indi. Ane chazang ji magic nashin ji yungu na nawa ji shagi dowa nga ngazu la. Ji samba tang lamsang cha goya ji tini yungu yo ma re. Chwe tam ji tindi rawa. Ndi ngazu patient di mewa cha rugu dowa. Ndi jina ngazu tini shedang laya dang dizu irritate chaya di karo ji maa cha dowa.
If you check, you can see for yourself that, right, what happens, what we eat, what we do. It's really not just our own personal choices. It's not that we are independent. In reality, we are always other dependent, right? Depend on some other external causes, conditions, beings, right? And that's why we get sick despite our own, wish not to get sick. That's why we get thirsty and hungry, even though we might want not to, right? And so, especially these days, we think like, oh, things just happen magically, almost like that. We think because, so easily you just push a button and things happen, right? The technology kind of makes this picture of just, oh, everything is so easy. And we think like, oh, it has to happen right away just by pushing a button. But in reality, it's so many things have to come together for many, to produce those things. And that's why sometimes it does not work. But we get so spoiled that, we don't have patience anymore. That's why we're so easily irritated, right? When we don't get things our own way.
Laso ta dordina tere nganzu dame gomi barche pala rimba nipa teta ngarangi namgyun takse digi tani tsingi dawa ta kecho dawa kande kande chilo tsingi do sani dawa do shenbe shendang di ngola taja tangu go re ta di tang yung di kausula ta tani tsingi 다 제발 쯤바디 지당의 증이다 내 나는데니 다 대응을라 미탁과 임발라 딱과 아니 대응을라 두마 임발라 찍고 대응을라 되니 그긴 신라 땜바지 임발라 라완젠스니다 된대기더니 툴비기 진당 개주 된대지 나랑 솔라 진대기 여봐 son자 아니 되게 동아 망보지 뛰는 거래서.
In short, today we went through through the explanation of the second stage of our analytical meditation on selflessness, where we have to see, really like look, investigate, and see how do we grasp to the self, right? How do we identify the self? Me, how is it me? What is this I, right? And there is this general feature of the kind of a more pervasive one, that is that we identify it as this most important, precious, dear thing to myself. And then under that, we also misconstrue the identity of a self as being, as being permanent, when in reality it is nothing but. We also misapprehend it as being singular, where in reality it's the kind of agglomeration of many multiple elements. And also we misconceive it as being independent, but in reality it's dependent on so many causes and conditions. And that's our confusion, that's our misconceptions, confused misconceptions. That's how we see, that's how we identify I, right? And so that's what we looked at today.
다 된대지 증기도 증기민도 스네 다 소소라 당보 지 따지 당고래 제금지고.
Actually, we need to check. This is what I'm telling you, but of course you need to see, are you personally yourself grasping the I in this way or not? Maybe you don't, right? But this is kind of a checklist, right, that I give you, and now you can see for yourself against this checklist, this is the way you also apprehend this I, this self.
다디 지당 안수 최게 나는 칙 the technical terms here the injile gyunan tata regimen ha maso shen율 ki tak serwa tang anju ta di jindu tinde jingle shen jingyor
Shenyulgi dakra.
그래 shen율 sene injigel tat inji sede kare.
Yeah, object of grasp. I mean, of grasping. Not really good. Kind of conceptual referent point, Khenpo. Object of fixation. There's a very technical term, Khenpo says, in the Dharma language, that we say that the self is this object of fixation. It's a referent conceptual object. Shinyulgidak, we say in Tibetan. Yes, it's a bit like a technical.
다 돈다 다오디 ngweni tinde ta chi menaya namgyu ngaran su ki nga se di jinyong di jindang di tinde jingre sene this year 돈다 다오디.
The meaning, if we were to translate it now into normal language, so to say, the meaning of this technical term is that even though there is no self, this is the way we misconstrue it. This is the way we grasp at it, right? So when we say object of fixation, it's right, it's kind of implied, at least in Tibetan, it's implied that actually in reality it's not real, it's not true, but this is just the way we fixate upon it.
다딜 ke number lo ding nge ko de kar resana pe ge chumbadi chidang tak se khorang yoda mesini samlo shira madana kheba shira yo mare ni zimba nanshin ge daji do dumido di chai de ge chumbori kenso wa kuma dawo di suresana dag mare ni namgi zimba nanshin zimba jero wa Zimba Nanshin ge Dutch Domin did say the Geshim Kuma di dire. That didn't true to Naya and di Dangazu true to Nadine, Kuma de Masumbachi Shabachi said it.
There is an extremely important point that I just need to really clarify. So, 3 exclamation marks here. It doesn't matter, it makes no difference here in our investigation whether this I exists or not. Okay, this is really not our concern. Is it existent or not, the self? What we really trying to see if this so-called self exists according to the way we fixate upon it. Does it exist, right? Exactly in the way how we identify it. This is what's the main kind of that's the main troublemaker. It's basically the main thief. That's the thief. It's not the self in itself alone. That's the thief. It's the thief. What steals everything is who steals everything is the identify identifying the self, well, believing that self exists exactly in the way how we perceive it, how we grasp at it. And so if we don't look into that, then we are looking for a thief in a completely wrong place. If we're just trying to see if self exists or not, that's like we're never going to catch a real thief, right? We're going to let the real thief go. So that's really important.
That's all. Janju semju rimbo je mage banam ge gyure je ge ba nyambara me ba ya gone gondo pelabare sho